"You're just not party material." My cousin laughed as the family uninvited me again. So when I got promoted, I booked my dream venue and sent invitations to everyone but them. The rage text started before the toast was even made. I, 31M, stared at my phone screen, reading the group chat message for the third time. My cousin had just announced another family gathering, a barbecue at their new house, and the familiar pit in my stomach started forming. I scrolled through the excited responses, the planning messages, the jokes about who would bring what. My name wasn't mentioned once. This wasn't new. For the past 5 years, ever since I'd graduated college and started my entry-level marketing job, I'd been systematically excluded from family events. It started small, forgotten invitations, last-minute changes I somehow never heard about. But it escalated when my cousin, who'd inherited his father's construction business at 25, started making comments about my lifestyle. The breaking point came during my uncle's birthday party last month. I'd shown up uninvited, figuring it was family and I should be welcome. My cousin found me in the kitchen, grabbed my arm, and told me I wasn't party material. He said I brought down the mood with my cheap clothes and boring job stories. The laugh that followed felt like a knife twisting in my chest. He suggested I skip future gatherings until I had something worth celebrating. I left that night humiliated, but something else burned inside me. Determination. 3 weeks later, everything changed. My boss called me into his office on a Tuesday morning. I expected another mundane project assignment, but instead, he offered me the senior marketing director position. The previous director had quit unexpectedly, and after reviewing my portfolio and recent campaign successes, they wanted me to step up immediately. The salary jump was staggering, from $45,000 to $95,000 overnight. More importantly, it came with a $15,000 signing bonus and a company credit card for client entertainment. For the first time in my adult life, I had real money and the freedom to use it. I didn't tell my family immediately. Instead, I started planning. The Grandview Ballroom had been my dream venue since I was a kid. My parents had taken me there for my grandmother's 80th birthday celebration, and I'd been mesmerized by the crystal chandeliers, the marble floors, and the sweeping view of the city skyline. It was where the wealthy celebrated milestones, where corporate events made headlines, where memories were made in style. A normal booking cost $8,000 for a Saturday evening. With catering, decorations, and entertainment, most events ran close to $20,000. It was completely out of reach for someone like me, or someone like the person I used to be. I called them on Wednesday. The event coordinator sounded surprised when I inquired about availability for the following Saturday. Most people booked months in advance. I explained I wanted to celebrate a career milestone and money wasn't a concern. When she quoted the full package price at $18,500, I didn't hesitate to put down the deposit. Thursday was spent crafting invitations. I designed them myself, printing them on thick cardstock with gold embossing. The message was simple. You're invited to celebrate my promotion to Senior Marketing Director at Grandview Ballroom. Cocktail attire. Open bar. Dinner provided. RSVP by Friday. I made a list of everyone in my extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends, 43 people total. Then I crossed off 5 names. My cousin, his wife, his parents, and his younger brother. The same people who had systematically excluded me from gatherings for years. The invitations went out Friday morning via overnight delivery. I wanted them to arrive Saturday, giving people just enough time to clear their schedules if they chose to attend, but not enough time for word to spread too widely. My phone started buzzing around 10 a.m. Saturday. My aunt called first, asking if this was real. I confirmed it was, explaining my recent promotion and desire to celebrate with family. She sounded shocked but pleased, saying she'd definitely attend. More calls followed. Cousins I rarely spoke to, family friends who remembered me as a kid, even my grandmother's elderly sister who lived across town. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People were excited, curious, and impressed. Many mentioned they hadn't seen me at recent family gatherings and were happy to reconnect. By noon, 31 people had confirmed attendance. I spent the afternoon getting ready, selecting my new charcoal suit and the Italian leather shoes I'd bought earlier that week. For the first time in years, I felt confident about a family event. The Grandview Ballroom exceeded my expectations. The staff had transformed the space with elegant lighting, white linens, and centerpieces of fresh flowers. The bar was fully stocked with premium liquors, and the catering team had prepared a menu that would have cost most people a month's salary. Guests started arriving at 6 p.m. The looks of amazement on their faces as they entered the ballroom was exactly what I'd hoped for. My younger cousins took selfies with the city skyline backdrop. The adults marveled at the champagne selection and the quality of the appetizers. My aunt approached me within the first hour, asking how I could afford such an elaborate celebration. I explained the promotion, the salary increase, and how I'd wanted to share this milestone with family. She seemed genuinely proud, mentioning how she'd always known I had potential. But the real validation came from watching the dynamics shift. Cousins who had barely acknowledged me at previous gatherings were now asking about my career, my plans, my thoughts on various topics. The respect in their voices was something I'd never experienced from this group. The evening progressed beautifully. Dinner was served at 7:30, a three-course meal that had people commenting on the quality throughout the night. The open bar kept conversation flowing, and the atmosphere was genuinely celebratory. Around 8:45, as I was preparing to make a toast, my phone started vibrating aggressively. Text messages were coming in rapid succession, all from my cousin. The first few were questions about the party, asking why he hadn't been invited. Then they turned accusatory, demanding to know how I could afford such an event and whether I was lying about my promotion. I ignored them and proceeded with my toast. Standing before the assembled family, I thanked everyone for coming and shared my excitement about the new position. I mentioned how meaningful it was to celebrate with people who had supported me throughout my career journey. The applause was genuine and warm. But my cousin's messages kept coming. He was asking other family members about the party, clearly getting details secondhand. The texts escalated from confusion to anger to outright rage. He accused me of deliberately excluding him, of being petty and vindictive. He claimed I was showing off, and that this whole celebration was just a way to embarrass him. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I'd been excluded from gatherings without explanation or consideration. Now, when I hosted my own event, he was outraged about not being included. Around 9:30, he started calling repeatedly. I let it go to voicemail, but his wife began texting as well. She was more diplomatic but equally upset, suggesting that family disagreements shouldn't result in exclusion from celebrations. She mentioned that they'd always considered me family and were hurt by being left out. I found this particularly rich coming from someone who had watched me be systematically uninvited from events for years without ever speaking up. The party continued until nearly midnight. People lingered, clearly not wanting the evening to end. Several relatives mentioned it was the best family gathering they'd attended in years. My grandmother's sister, who was 87 and rarely left her house, told me she was proud of what I'd accomplished and hoped I'd host more events like this. As guests were leaving, my aunt pulled me aside. She thanked me for the wonderful evening and then, unexpectedly, apologized. She said she'd noticed I hadn't been invited to recent family gatherings and should have spoken up. She admitted that my cousin had been making decisions about the guest lists, and she'd gone along with it to avoid conflict. This confirmation of what I'd suspected was both validating and painful. It meant my exclusion had been deliberate and noticed, but no one had bothered to intervene. Update 1. The fallout began in earnest on Sunday morning. My cousin showed up at my apartment at 8 a.m., pounding on the door and demanding to be let in. I looked through the peephole and saw him pacing angrily in the hallway, his face red with fury. I didn't open the door. Instead, I called him and told him I was home, but wouldn't be letting him in while he was this agitated. He demanded an explanation for being excluded from the party, claiming it was a family event and he had a right to be there. I explained calmly that it was my event, celebrating my achievement, and I had chosen to invite people who had been supportive of my career. I pointed out that he had actively excluded me from family gatherings for years and had specifically told me I wasn't party material. He denied this at first, then minimized it, saying those were just jokes and I was being too sensitive. When I remained firm, he shifted to attacking the party itself, claiming I was just showing off and that spending so much money on one evening was irresponsible and immature. The conversation ended when he started shouting loud enough that neighbors were opening their doors. I hung up and he eventually left, but not before kicking my door and leaving a dent in the frame. Over the next few days, the family drama intensified. My cousin had clearly been working the phones, trying to turn people against me. He was spreading a narrative that I had deliberately tried to humiliate him and split the family with my petty revenge. But his campaign largely backfired. The people who had attended the party had genuinely enjoyed themselves and seen my cousin's behavior patterns over the years. Several relatives called to support me, mentioning that they'd been uncomfortable with how I'd been treated previously but hadn't known how to address it. My uncle, my cousin's father, called Wednesday evening. He was more diplomatic than his son, but still clearly upset about the exclusion. He suggested that family disputes should be handled privately and that public celebrations shouldn't be used to make points. I respectfully disagreed. I explained that I'd tried to address the exclusion issue privately for years without success. I pointed out that my cousin had made his views about my worthiness for family events very clear, and I'd simply acted accordingly when planning my own celebration. The conversation was tense, but civil. My uncle seemed to understand my perspective, even if he didn't agree with my methods. He asked if I'd consider including my cousin in future family events I might host. I told him I'd consider it if my cousin acknowledged his behavior and offered a genuine apology. Update 2. 3 weeks later, I received an unexpected call from my cousin. His tone was different, less aggressive, more subdued. He asked if we could meet for coffee to discuss what had happened. We met at a neutral location, a cafe halfway between our neighborhoods. He looked tired and seemed to have lost some of his usual swagger. He started by acknowledging that he'd been unfair in excluding me from family events. He claimed he'd been going through his own struggles with the family business and had taken his frustrations out on me. This partial admission was more than I'd expected, but it wasn't quite the full apology I'd hoped for. He still seemed to view the situation as a mutual misunderstanding rather than recognizing the pattern of deliberate exclusion he'd created. He asked if I'd be willing to start fresh and include him in future celebrations. I told him I appreciated the conversation, but needed to see consistent changes in his behavior before I'd be comfortable with that. The meeting ended cordially, but without resolution. He seemed frustrated that I wasn't immediately willing to forgive and forget, but I'd learned that meaningful change required more than words. In the months that followed, the family dynamics slowly shifted. My newfound financial success and confidence had altered how people interacted with me. Invitations to gatherings started coming regularly again, though I was selective about which ones I attended. My cousin's behavior toward me became more respectful, though it felt calculated rather than genuine. He was careful not to make dismissive comments about my career or lifestyle, but the underlying tension remained. The most significant change was in my own perspective. The success of the Grandview Ballroom celebration had shown me that I didn't need to accept being marginalized or excluded. I had options, resources, and the ability to create my own opportunities for connection and celebration. Update 3. 6 months after the party, I received an invitation to my cousin's son's graduation celebration. It was being held at a modest restaurant, nothing approaching the scale of my event, but it represented a gesture of inclusion. I decided to attend, bringing an expensive gift and maintaining friendly but distant behavior throughout the evening. My cousin made a point of introducing me to people as his successful marketing executive cousin, which felt performative but was a stark contrast to how he'd treated me previously. During the evening, several family members approached me privately to thank me for the wake-up call my party had provided. They mentioned that seeing me thrive and succeed had made them reconsider their own behavior and assumptions about family dynamics. My aunt, who had apologized the night of my party, pulled me aside to mention that she'd been more conscious of inclusion in family planning since then. She'd started specifically asking about guest lists and making sure no one was being systematically left out. This was perhaps the most meaningful outcome of the entire experience. While my relationship with my cousin remained complicated, the broader family had learned something about the impact of exclusion and the importance of inclusion. A year later, I hosted another celebration, this time for my birthday at a smaller but still elegant venue. I invited everyone in the family, including my cousin. He attended and even gave a brief speech acknowledging my career success and expressing gratitude for being included. It wasn't the dramatic reconciliation that movies might suggest, but it was progress. More importantly, I'd learned that respect isn't automatically given based on family relationships. It's earned through consistent behavior and can be lost through repeated poor choices. The Grandview Ballroom party had been expensive, but it proved to be one of the best investments I'd ever made. Not just in terms of the immediate satisfaction of proving my worth, but in fundamentally changing how I viewed my place in the family and my own capacity to shape the relationships around me. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting ahead and showing people what they've been missing. The rage texts my cousin sent that night were just the beginning of his realization that excluding someone from your circle doesn't make them disappear. It just motivates them to create their own, better circle. Looking back, I'm grateful for those years of exclusion. They taught me resilience, showed me who truly valued my presence, and ultimately motivated me to achieve more than I might have otherwise. The boy who was told he wasn't party material had thrown the party of the year, and everyone who mattered was there to see it.